I once heard someone say that to continue to look inside yourself to find your faults is a recipe for spiritual depression. What do you think about that? Agree? Disagree? Why? Well, we're going to flesh that idea out a little bit and wrestle with it in just a moment. Before we do, last week all of my family was home from Arizona and Michigan, and a few of us got in the four-wheel drives. The rain was so high, or the water was so high at the river, that our campsite was flooded. That was the down part. The upside of that was a lot of the little back roads were also flooded. So I'll show you just a couple of minutes of us playing on the back roads, and then come back and talk about this issue of continually looking for our faults causing spiritual depression. Put down menu.
Let's see. Oh,
that looks
my
pretty
goodness,
deep.
that looks pretty deep.
Give it a go.
What do you think, kid?
I love
Ooh, yeah. He wants to take that path to the right. Oh, there he goes. Yep. Yeah, hit it again.
Totally wicked.
Here we go.
Totally wicked, huh?
Again. Faster.
Okay, let's get back to our topic of the day. That is continuing to look into yourself to find your faults, causing spiritual depression. Does it or does it not? By the way, I'm busy today, so I'm going to have to squeeze this devotion in, the taping of it, in between doing yard work, because I was gone to Michigan playing with the kids for a week. Sue was in the hospital in Michigan for 6 days. We came back and had a little over a week of the kids all being home, celebrating the 4th of July, and the yard is atrocious. So squeezing this in during that, let's talk about this. Well, we may have just a little problem with the cars coming and going yeah, up here on the bridge. Well, Sue and I, when we were newlyweds, attended a church, and there was a lady in our church, an older lady, that just never quite felt the love of God, or not what she thought it ought to be the love of God. And she literally thought that she was going to go to hell every week. That is, every week she thought she sinned bad enough and God had turned his back on her. And so in that particular church, we had an altar call where people could come to the altar and pray at the end of the service. And every week she would come down and kneel and pray and give her life to Christ. She didn't understand the depths of grace. She didn't yet understand that even though she saw herself as pretty filthy, I suppose, and messed up, that's not what God saw. And God forgave her through Christ. And I can see that happening. There are times that we're pretty hard on ourselves and we can't forgive ourselves, so we think God can't forgive us. So I understand what that person was saying when he said that to keep on, to continue to look inside of ourselves for our faults is a recipe for spiritual depression. Because we start to believe something about God that is not true. I'm going to say that I have not seen very many people extreme like that poor lady was. Just could not feel the love of God. And I've known a few, but not very many. Far more often, I have seen the other extreme, where people felt like their sins were forgiven, that because God forgave them of their sins, they didn't have to say they were sorry to anybody. They were somehow perfect, better than those around them, and usually caused a lot more problem than the people that understood their faults. The ones that didn't realize they had any faults, but they could sure see the faults in others. You know, I don't really know which one of these conditions is worse. I'm pretty certain that the spiritual depression and always focusing on your faults and all the gloom and emptiness and isolation that comes from that probably feels the worst. But on the other hand, not saying that it's a good thing, but many of the saints down through history have been keenly aware of their faults and the faults of the world around them, and have struggled with a kind of an isolation and a discouragement because of that. But I don't know that you find very many of the great saints of the past that feel beyond feeling guilt or conviction, that have grown beyond the point of feeling their own weaknesses and God's majesty. And so it may be harder to get through to a person that has this "I'm better than you" attitude than it is to get through to a person that is always feeling bowed and humbled. Although getting through to either of them is pretty tough, because it betrays a worldview of God that isn't entirely accurate. My mind goes back to the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle had a view of ethics that today we call virtue ethics. And he talks about virtues and vices. And on two extremes, you have vices. And when you bring extremes to the middle, you have a virtue. And let's take what we're talking about here. If you take an extreme way over to one side, a person just is always flaunting themselves and puffing themselves up, and you have an arrogance that is a vice. You have a selfishness that is a vice. If you go clear to the other side here, with kind of always feel self-deprecating and looking down at yourself and not realizing the potential of what God calls you to be, then that is also a vice. It's not a virtue to be self-deprecating, and it's not a virtue to be so assured of yourself that you feel better than others. Someplace in the middle, the virtue is a realistic look at who you are. You have strengths, you have weaknesses. But even more important, a realistic view of who God is. God loves you more than you can imagine. If you are on the arrogant side, God sees those faults that you're blind to. If you're on the self-deprecating side, God loves you more than you can imagine. And someplace in the middle, there is a virtue that is honest with yourself, good and bad, and honest with who God is. And it's a walk of faith, of trusting that God forgives, that God makes something out of your life. That's kind of hard, isn't it? That takes a long walk with the Lord and a lot of faith and a lot of growth during your lifetime. So you're on process today of becoming what God is wanting you to be. So what do I do when all the yard work is finished, if it ever gets finished? I don't know. I'll think of something. In the meantime, may God bless you and watch over you. May God give you a realistic view of yourself. May you see your strengths. May you see any tweaks that need to be done in your life. May God work in you and grow you day by day and year by year, and even between now and Sunday when we meet again. God bless you.